Hello and welcome to Healthy Kidneys After 60, our space for deep conversations about the things that truly matter as we navigate the golden years of our lives. I am your host, Jane Pauley, and today we are touching on a subject that I know many of you feel in your bones, or perhaps more accurately, in your feet and legs. It is that quiet, nagging worry that comes when walking to the mailbox feels harder than it used to, or when a sudden cramp wakes you in the middle of the night. To help us understand these signals, I am deeply honored to welcome a man who has dedicated his life to the heart of medicine and the stories of thousands of patients. Please welcome the renowned neurosurgeon and medical journalist, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Dr. Gupta, it is such a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jane. It is truly a privilege to be here on Healthy Kidneys After 60. You know, in my 50 years of practicing medicine and speaking with people all over the world, I have realized that the most important conversations usually happen not in a sterile operating room, but in quiet moments like this one. I have sat at the bedside of over 20,000 patients, and if there is one thing I have learned, it is that our bodies are constantly whispering to us. Sometimes those whispers are about our kidneys, sometimes about our hearts, but very often they are about the silent rivers of life within us, our circulation. I am looking forward to sharing these stories and perhaps offering some clarity and hope to everyone listening who might be feeling a bit uncertain about the changes they are seeing in their own bodies.
Dr. Gupta, I want to start with something that I think resonates with almost everyone in our audience. We often hear our friends or neighbors say things like, well, my legs are just heavy because I'm 70 now. Or, I get these cramps because I'm getting older, it's just part of the deal. There is this pervasive sense of resignation, a feeling that our bodies are meant to fade and fail in very specific, painful ways as we age. We see people who were once so active, so full of energy, suddenly slowing down, struggling with basic movements, and we just label it as normal aging. But is it really? I wonder if we are doing ourselves a disservice by simply accepting these limitations without question. Why is it that some people seem to keep their vitality well into their 80s, while others feel like their world is shrinking before they even hit 65? Is this decline truly an inevitable part of the human clock, or are we missing something much more significant happening beneath the surface?
Jane, that is the million-dollar question, and it's one that I hear in almost every clinic visit. We have been conditioned to believe that aging is a process of inevitable decay, but the latest research from places like Harvard and major medical centers across the country is telling us a very different story. What we often dismiss as just getting old is frequently a collection of very specific physiological signals that we are simply misinterpreting. Think of your body like a grand old house. If the lights flicker, you don't say the house is just old. You check the wiring. If the water pressure drops, you look at the pipes. Our circulatory system is exactly like those pipes and wires. When we talk about feeling heavy in the legs or that persistent coldness in the feet that won't go away even with thick wool socks, we aren't just looking at the calendar, we are looking at the health of our blood vessels. Clinical studies have shown that what many seniors describe as heavy legs or stiffness is actually a condition called chronic venous insufficiency or peripheral artery disease in its early stages. It isn't that the muscles are just tired, it's that they are starving for oxygen because the blood isn't flowing the way it used to. When the blood flow slows down, your tissues start to send out distress signals. Those cramps that wake you up at 3 a.m. aren't just a nuisance of age, they are a frantic message from your muscles saying, I can't breathe. We have seen in countless evaluations that when we address the health of the vascular walls and improve the quality of the blood flow, many of these inevitable symptoms of aging actually begin to recede. It is a profound shift in perspective. We have to stop looking at the birth certificate and start looking at the internal environment. Aging is a fact of life, but the suffering we often associate with it is frequently optional if we know what to look for and how to respond.
That is a powerful distinction, that the suffering might be optional. It's almost a relief to hear, yet it also brings a bit of anxiety. If these symptoms aren't just normal, then what are they actually telling us? I think many people listening are probably thinking about that specific tingling in their toes or the way their calves ache after just a short walk. It's easy to feel a sense of dread when you realize that these small things might be warnings of a much larger problem. Can you help us understand the gravity of ignoring these signs? When someone feels that first sharp cramp or notices their feet are always a bit blue or pale, what is actually happening in the hidden parts of their body, and what happens if they just keep walking on through the pain thinking they are just being tough?
Ignoring those signs is like ignoring a small leak in a dam. It might seem manageable today, but the structural integrity is being compromised every single second. When the circulation in our lower extremities begins to falter, it's rarely just a leg problem. Our vascular system is one continuous network. If the blood is struggling to reach your toes, it's a safe bet that the microvessels in your kidneys and even the small arteries in your brain are facing similar pressures. In my years of practice, I've seen that the person who ignores their cold feet today is often the same person who faces a much more serious cardiovascular event 5 or 10 years down the road. This isn't meant to cause panic, but rather to spark a sense of urgency. We know from extensive European and American studies that reduced blood flow leads to a buildup of metabolic waste in the tissues. This causes inflammation, which then further damages the lining of the blood vessels, a layer we call the endothelium. Once that lining is compromised, you lose the ability to regulate blood pressure effectively and to keep the blood flowing smoothly. It's a downward spiral. But the beauty of the human body, even at 80 or 90, is its capacity for repair if given the right tools. When we identify these issues as circulation signals rather than age milestones, we regain our power. We move from being victims of time to being stewards of our own health. We can actually begin to restore the elasticity of those vessels and clear the path for that life-giving blood to reach every corner of the body again.
Dr. Gupta, as we sit here and discuss these medical realities, I cannot help but think about the emotional toll this takes on a person's spirit. When someone begins to realize that their body is no longer a reliable vessel, that every step down the driveway is a gamble with pain, it creates a very specific kind of quiet terror. I have heard from so many of our listeners who say they have stopped going to the park or even walking through the grocery store because they are afraid their legs will simply give out or that the cramping will become unbearable in public. It is more than just a physical symptom. It is a loss of independence and a shrinking of their world. How do you address that deep-seated fear in your patients who feel like they are just waiting for the inevitable day they can no longer walk at all?
You have touched on the very heart of why I do this work, Jane, because the fear of losing one's mobility is often more paralyzing than the pain itself. I remember very clearly a gentleman named Robert Miller, a 68-year-old retired engineer living in a quiet suburb of Texas, who came to see me a few years ago. Robert was a man who had spent his entire life being active, but when he sat in my office, he looked utterly defeated, telling me that for the last 6 months he had been experiencing these agonizing cramps in his calves every time he tried to take his dog for a walk. He described it not as a simple ache, but as if a hot iron was being pressed into his muscle after just 2 blocks of walking, forcing him to stop and lean against a tree or a mailbox just to catch his breath. The tragedy was that Robert had convinced himself this was just the price of his 68 years on Earth, and he had started staying home, sitting in his recliner, watching the world pass by through his window because he was embarrassed to be seen limping. He told me, "Doctor, I feel like I'm becoming a ghost in my own life." And that sentence stayed with me because it represents millions of people who are suffering in silence. What Robert didn't realize, and what I had to explain to him with great care, was that his bap chan, his calf muscles, were screaming for oxygen because his arteries had narrowed, a condition we call intermittent claudication. It wasn't that his body was expired, but rather that it was underfueled, and by resigning himself to that chair, he was actually accelerating the decline. We sat there for a long time talking about how the human spirit is tied to movement, and I told him that we weren't going to just accept this as his new normal.
It is heartbreaking to think of Mr. Miller feeling like a ghost, and I suspect many people listening right now are nodding their heads because they feel that same invisibility. When you speak to someone like Robert, who has already begun to withdraw from his life, how do you bridge that gap between the clinical diagnosis and the restoration of hope? It seems like a monumental task to convince someone that a body which has failed them can actually be rehabilitated, especially when they have been told by others or even other doctors that they should just take it easy and accept the limitations of their age.
It requires a fundamental shift in how we view the aging process, moving away from a narrative of decay and toward a narrative of maintenance and renewal. With Robert Miller in Texas, I had to show him the data, but more importantly, I had to show him a path forward that didn't involve just taking it easy, because for a person like him, taking it easy was actually the most dangerous thing he could do. I explained to him that when he stops moving, his circulation only gets worse, creating a vicious cycle where the vessels become even more brittle and the heart has to work even harder. We talked about the fact that his pain was a signal, not a final sentence, and that by using targeted nutritional support and a very specific gradual walking program, we could actually encourage his body to build what we call collateral circulation, basically natural bypasses around the narrow spots in his arteries. Robert was skeptical at first, asking me if I was sure he wasn't just chasing a dream of youth that was long gone. But I looked him in the eye and said, "Robert, your vessels don't know how old you are. They only know what you feed them and how you use them." He started to realize that his fear was a byproduct of a lack of information, and that once we understood the mechanics of his blood flow, we could start to engineer a comeback. It wasn't about running marathons. It was about the freedom to walk to the end of the street to talk to his neighbor without having to stop in agony. That is the kind of independence that defines the quality of life after 60, and seeing that spark of hope return to his eyes was just as important as any prescription I could have written.
So it really comes down to the idea that we have more agency than we think, even when the pain feels overwhelming. I think it's important for our audience to hear that Robert's story isn't just an outlier, but a roadmap for what is possible. When we talk about recognizing the signs early, as you mentioned before, it's about catching that moment before the ghosting starts, isn't it?
Exactly, Jane. It is about intervention before the world shrinks too small to live in. Robert Miller eventually got back to walking his dog for nearly a mile every morning, and the change in his mental health was just as dramatic as the change in his physical health. He stopped seeing his 68 years as a burden and started seeing them as a foundation he could build upon. This is the message we need to broadcast, that normal aging does not mean a life of pain and isolation. When we listen to the signals like the ones Robert had, those cramps, that heaviness, and we treat them with the clinical seriousness they deserve, we aren't just treating a leg, we are saving a life from the shadows. Every senior deserves to know that their mobility is a treasure that can be protected, provided they don't wait until the silence becomes permanent.
Dr. Gupta, one of the most frustrating things for people our age is the conflicting advice we get from every direction. I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone say, "Oh, you have leg cramps, you just need more calcium, or maybe eat a banana for the potassium." It seems like such a simple, harmless piece of advice, but I suspect that these common sense remedies might actually be standing in the way of people getting the real help they need. We spend so much money on supplements that might not even be addressing the root cause of our discomfort. Are we oversimplifying these complex vascular issues? And in doing so, are we missing the chance to treat the underlying narrowness of our arteries?
You have hit on a very dangerous trend in self-diagnosis, Jane, and it's something that keeps me up at night. While calcium and potassium are certainly important for muscle function, the vast majority of chronic leg cramps and heavy sensations in the elderly have absolutely nothing to do with a mineral deficiency in the way people think. This is a profound misunderstanding of human physiology. When a muscle cramps during activity or even at rest in an older adult, it is most often a cry for oxygen, not a cry for a banana. What is actually happening is that the internal diameter of the arteries is restricted, often by a buildup of plaque or a loss of elasticity, and the blood simply cannot deliver enough fuel to keep the muscle fibers working smoothly. When we tell someone to just take more calcium, we are often giving them a placebo while their vascular system continues to deteriorate. I've seen patients who have taken every mineral supplement under the sun for years, yet their walking distance continues to drop because the pipes are still clogged. This is why I want to talk about the role of specific nutrients that actually impact the architecture of the blood vessels themselves, like vitamin B3, also known as niacin.
Vitamin B3 or niacin, That's interesting because we usually hear about the B vitamins in relation to energy or nerves, but rarely do we hear about them in the context of opening up our pipes, as you put it. How does something as simple as a vitamin actually change the physical state of a hardened or narrowed artery? It sounds almost too good to be true for someone who has been struggling with these issues for a decade. Is there actual scientific weight behind the idea that we can use nutrition to physically dilate these vessels?
There is a massive body of research, much of it originating from some of the most prestigious labs at Harvard and across Europe, that supports the vascular benefits of niacin. You see, vitamin B3 is a powerful vasodilator, which means it actually helps the smooth muscles within the arterial walls to relax and expand. When these vessels dilate, the resistance to blood flow drops, and that life-giving oxygen can finally reach the tissues that have been starving. But niacin does something even more impressive. It is one of the few substances that can effectively raise our good HDL cholesterol while simultaneously lowering the bad LDL and triglycerides that form the plaques narrowing our arteries. It's like having a natural cleaning crew and a widening crew working on your highways at the same time. I often explain to my colleagues that we have focused so much on aggressive pharmaceutical interventions that we've forgotten the fundamental building blocks of vascular health. When we provide the body with the right concentration of vitamin B3, we aren't just masking a symptom, we are helping the endothelium, that delicate inner lining of the vessel, to produce nitric oxide, which is the body's own natural signal to keep the blood flowing freely. This isn't just theory, it's biochemistry.
It sounds like we are talking about a total shift from supplementing to restructuring. If niacin can actually help clear out the debris and widen the path, it seems like it should be a cornerstone of how we think about aging. But I imagine it's not just a matter of taking a pill and hoping for the best. There must be a broader context to how this fits into a person's daily life, especially when they are already dealing with the fear and the physical limitations we've discussed.
You're absolutely right, Jane. It is never just one magic bullet. It's about a comprehensive strategy where we use these biological tools to create a window of opportunity. When the niacin starts to work and the blood flow improves, the patient suddenly finds that they can walk a little further without pain. That increased movement then further improves their circulation, creating a positive feedback loop. I've had many conversations with people who were on the verge of needing surgical intervention, and by focusing on these vascular vitamins and a disciplined approach to their health, they were able to stabilize and even improve their condition. We have to stop thinking of vitamins as optional extras and start seeing them as essential components of our internal infrastructure. If you want a house to stand for 100 years, you have to ensure the materials are top quality. Our blood vessels are no different. They require specific molecular support to remain flexible and open, and vitamin B3 is one of the most potent tools we have in that kit. It's about giving the body the resources it needs to heal itself from the inside out, rather than just waiting for things to break.
Dr. Gupta, I want to talk about the things we do out of habit, the little rituals we have that we think are helpful but might actually be masking a much deeper crisis. I'm thinking about the person who always wears 2 pairs of socks because their feet are just naturally cold, or the woman who spends her evenings rubbing cream into her legs to soothe that heavy, restless feeling. We often treat these as personality traits or minor inconveniences of being older. But I suspect you see them as something else entirely, perhaps as missed opportunities or even dangerous delays in seeking real medical intervention. What are the most common mistakes you see people making when they try to manage these symptoms on their own at home?
The biggest mistake, Jane, is the normalization of pathology. We have become far too good at coping with symptoms instead of questioning them. A perfect example is a woman I met named Linda Thompson. Linda was 72 years old, living in the warm, humid climate of Florida, yet she came to see me wearing thick wool socks and heavy shoes. She told me that for the last 2 years, even in the middle of a Florida summer, her feet felt like blocks of ice. She had developed this ritual of soaking her feet in hot water every night and using heating pads in bed, thinking she just had poor circulation because of her age. But when I looked at her feet, I saw the real story that she had been ignoring. Her skin was thin, shiny, and had a slightly dusky purplish tint, and the hair on her lower legs had completely disappeared. These are classic textbook signs of advanced peripheral vascular disease. But because it had happened so slowly, Linda just adapted her life around it. She was making the mistake of treating the temperature of her skin rather than the health of her blood vessels. By the time she reached my office, she was at a high risk for developing non-healing ulcers or even gangrene because the blood flow was so restricted that her skin was literally starting to die from a lack of nutrients.
That is a chilling thought, especially for someone like Linda, who thought she was just managing a common old age problem. It's as if the body is sending out a flare, but we're just putting on a sweater to hide the light. When you see someone like Linda, who has been doing these things for years, how do you even begin to correct those habits? It must be difficult to tell someone that the heating pad they've relied on is actually a sign that they are in a dangerous medical state. What is the conversation like when you have to break through that wall of habit and reveal the underlying risk?
It's a delicate conversation because you don't want to make them feel foolish for trying to help themselves, but you have to be firm about the reality of the situation. I told Linda that her heating pads were a Band-Aid on a broken dam. I explained that the coldness wasn't coming from the air around her, but from the fact that her internal furnace, her blood flow, was being choked off. One of the most common mistakes people make, besides just warming the problem, is the misuse of over-the-counter pain relievers. People take ibuprofen or aspirin for the leg pain, which might dull the ache, but it does absolutely nothing to address the narrowing of the arteries. In fact, it can sometimes mask the progression of the disease until it's too late. With Linda, we had to stop the coping and start the correcting. We talked about how her habits were actually a form of denial. She admitted to me that she was afraid if she went to a doctor, they would tell her she needed surgery or that she was failing, so she just kept buying more socks. This avoidance through habit is perhaps the most dangerous mistake of all. It's the belief that if you don't name the problem, it doesn't exist. But in the world of vascular health, silence is the loudest warning of all.
It seems like we are talking about a lack of vascular literacy. People simply don't know what to look for, or they misinterpret what they see. If Linda's shiny skin and cold feet were the warnings, what should the rest of us be looking for in our own daily lives? Are there other subtle signs that we might be dismissing as just getting older that are actually red flags for our circulation?
Absolutely. Beyond the coldness and the skin changes, one very subtle sign is how long it takes for a small scratch or a bruise on your legs to heal. If a minor nick from shaving or a bump against a coffee table takes weeks to disappear, that is a major red flag that your blood isn't delivering the repair materials, the white blood cells and nutrients needed for healing. Another sign is a feeling of heaviness or fullness in the legs that gets worse at the end of the day, but feels better if you elevate your feet. This often points to the veins struggling to pump blood back up to the heart. And then there is the window shopper's sign, where you find yourself needing to stop and look in store windows every few minutes, not because you're interested in the display, but because your calves are cramping and you need to let them rest. These aren't just quirks of being 70, they are clinical indicators. My advice to anyone listening is, if you find yourself changing your habits to accommodate your legs, whether it's wearing different shoes, avoiding stairs, or using extra blankets, stop and ask yourself why. Don't let your habits hide your health problems. The sooner you face the reality of your circulation, the more options we have to fix it without drastic measures.
Dr. Gupta, we've talked about the warnings and the mistakes, but I want to turn our focus toward the possibility of real, tangible improvement. It can be so discouraging to feel like your body is on a one-way street toward decline. But you've seen the other side of this. You've seen people who were struggling to cross a room eventually regain their ability to walk their grandchildren to the park. I would love for you to share a story of hope, a real case where changing the internal environment of the body through nutrition and care actually turned things around. Is there a specific patient who stands out to you as a testament to the power of these vascular vitamins we've been discussing?
One of the most inspiring transformations I've witnessed involved a woman named Margaret Lewis, a 76-year-old former schoolteacher from a coastal town in California. Margaret came to me because she was suffering from severe varicose veins and a constant dragging heaviness in her legs that made her feel twice her age. She told me she felt weighted down, as if she were walking through deep mud every time she tried to move. She had been told by other specialists that her only option was a painful vein stripping procedure, which she was terrified of because of her age. When we looked at her nutritional profile and her vascular health, I noticed she was significantly deficient in vitamin C and vitamin K2, two nutrients that are absolutely critical for the structural integrity of the blood vessels. We decided to try a conservative approach first, focusing heavily on rebuilding the scaffolding of her veins through targeted supplementation and diet. I told her, Margaret, we are going to try to heal your vessels from the inside out before we think about taking them out.
That's a fascinating phrase, rebuilding the scaffolding of the veins. I think most of us think of vitamin C as something we take for a cold, not something that can help with varicose veins or leg heaviness. And vitamin K2 is something many people haven't even heard of. How do these two vitamins work together to actually repair the physical structure of a blood vessel that has become stretched or weakened over 7 decades? It sounds like we're talking about a kind of internal biological engineering.
That is exactly what it is, Jane. You see, vitamin C is the essential cofactor for the production of collagen. Most people think of collagen for their skin and wrinkles, but your blood vessels are actually made of a massive amount of collagen. It's what gives them their strength and their snap. Without enough vitamin C, the vessel walls become thin and leaky, which contributes to that heavy, swollen feeling Margaret was experiencing. Then you have vitamin K2, which is the traffic cop for calcium in the body. Its job is to make sure calcium goes into your bones and teeth, and this is the crucial part, to keep it out of your soft tissues like your arteries and veins. When people have a K2 deficiency, calcium can deposit in the vessel walls, making them stiff and brittle. By giving Margaret high-quality C and K2, we were essentially giving her body the bricks and mortar to reinforce those sagging vein walls and the cleaner to keep the arterial walls flexible. Within about 3 months, Margaret started noticing a remarkable difference. The swelling in her ankles subsided, the muddy feeling in her legs began to lift, and she told me she felt a lightness she hadn't felt in 15 years.
A lightness after 15 years of heaviness, that must have felt like a miracle for her. It's so powerful to realize that the solution wasn't necessarily a scalpel, but a better understanding of what her cells were lacking. I think for many seniors, the fear of surgery is so great that they would rather suffer in silence. Hearing that there is a nutritional pathway to internal repair must be incredibly heartening. Did Margaret's experience change how she viewed her own aging process after that?
It changed everything for her. Margaret Lewis went from being someone who was afraid to leave her house because of the pain to someone who started a local walking group for seniors in her California neighborhood. She became an advocate for what she called biological renewal. She told me that the most important lesson she learned was that her body wasn't breaking down like an old car that needs to be scrapped. It was simply a living organism that was hungry for the right nutrients. She realized that by supporting her collagen production and managing her calcium placement, she was giving her vascular system a second chance. Her story is a perfect example of why we should never write off the elderly body's ability to respond to proper care. When we stop looking at the symptoms as inevitable and start looking at them as treatable, the entire horizon of aging changes. Margaret didn't just get her legs back, she got her freedom back. And she did it by focusing on the very foundations of her vascular health.
Dr. Gupta, as we talk about these stories of recovery, I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the darker side of this issue, the moments when the signals are ignored for too long. We've discussed cramps and heaviness, but there's a specific kind of symptom that I know strikes fear into the hearts of many: numbness and loss of balance. It starts with a little tingling like pins and needles, but it can lead to a devastating fall. For a person in their 70s or 80s, a fall isn't just an accident, it's a life-altering event. How do we distinguish between a foot that has just fallen asleep and a vascular system that is failing to protect our nerves and our balance?
This is perhaps the most critical part of our conversation, Jane, because the line between a minor symptom and a major catastrophe is often thinner than we realize. When we talk about numbness and tingling, we are often talking about the health of the peripheral nerves, but those nerves are entirely dependent on the tiny blood vessels that feed them. I think of George Wilson, an 81-year-old gentleman from a small town in Ohio. George was a proud man, a veteran who prided himself on his independence, but he started noticing a persistent numbness in his toes that eventually spread to the balls of his feet. He described it as walking on cotton balls or walking on clouds. He couldn't quite feel the floor beneath him. Because he couldn't feel the ground clearly, his brain was getting confused, and he started losing his balance. One evening, just walking from his kitchen to his living room, George tripped on a rug he had walked over 10,000 times. He suffered a hip fracture, and as we know in medicine, for a man of 81, a hip fracture is a statistical turning point that often leads to a rapid decline in overall health.
That is the nightmare scenario every family fears. George's story is so tragic because it started with something as seemingly small as numb toes. It's terrifying to think that walking on cotton balls is actually a precursor to a broken hip. When you looked at George's case, what was the connection between his circulation and that loss of feeling? I think many people don't realize that our nerves can actually starve, just like our muscles do. Is that what happened to him? Was it a lack of blood flow that eventually led to that fall?
Precisely. We call this peripheral neuropathy, and while it's often associated with diabetes, in many seniors like George, it is purely a result of long-term ischemia, which is just a fancy word for inadequate blood supply. When the tiny vessels, the capillaries that wrap around the nerves, become clogged or narrowed, the nerve fibers begin to wither and die. They stop sending accurate signals to the brain about where the feet are in space. George wasn't clumsy. He was neurologically blind in his feet because his circulation had failed him. This is why it is so vital to pay attention to that pins and needles sensation. If it doesn't go away after you move around, or if it happens frequently without you sitting in a strange position, it is a sign that your nerves are in distress. In my practice, I always tell patients that if they feel a loss of sensation, they need to act immediately. We need to look at things like vitamin E, which is a massive antioxidant that protects the fatty sheath around the nerves and keeps the blood from becoming too sticky. If George had addressed his circulation and his nerve health 6 months earlier, he likely never would have had that fall.
It's a sobering reminder that our bodies don't just fail us, they give us a series of increasingly loud warnings. If George had been aware that the cotton ball feeling was a vascular emergency, his life today might be completely different. For our listeners who might be feeling that tingling right now, or who feel a bit unsteady on their feet, what is the most important thing they can do to prevent a tragedy like George's? Is there a way to wake up those nerves before the damage becomes permanent?
The first step is acknowledging that numbness is never normal. If you feel it, you must get your circulation checked, not just a pulse check, but a real evaluation of your blood flow. Second, we have to look at the stickiness of the blood. As we age, our blood can become more prone to microclotting, which chokes off those tiny vessels feeding the nerves. This is where vitamin E and other natural blood thinners found in a healthy diet play such a huge role. They keep the rivers flowing even into the smallest streams. For George, after his surgery, we worked hard on his nutrition to prevent further nerve death in his other leg. But the lesson for everyone else is, don't wait for the fall. If your feet feel like they are disappearing, or if the ground feels soft when it should be hard, your body is telling you that the blood isn't reaching its destination. That is a call to action. We have the tools to improve that flow and protect those nerves, but we need the time to do it before a bone breaks. Your balance is one of your most precious assets in your 80s. Don't let a silent vascular problem steal it from you.
Dr. Gupta, I want to talk about our kitchens. For many of us, especially as we get older, we try so hard to eat right. We follow the traditional advice, lots of toast, maybe some margarine because we were told it was better for the heart years ago, or those healthy breakfast cereals marketed to seniors. But I've been reading more lately about how some of these supposedly safe foods might actually be contributing to the very inflammation and vascular aging we're trying to avoid. Are there hidden villains in our pantry that are making our blood vessels age faster than they should? And on the flip side, what should we really be reaching for if we want to give our arteries the best chance at staying young?
This is an area where there is so much outdated information floating around, Jane. Many of the heart-healthy foods of the 1980s and 90s are actually disastrous for our microcirculation today. For example, many people still use highly processed vegetable oils or margarines that are loaded with omega-6 fatty acids, which can be incredibly inflammatory to the delicate lining of our blood vessels. When that lining, the endothelium, becomes inflamed, it gets sticky, and that's when the trouble starts. Also, those healthy cereals are often just sugar in disguise, and we know that high blood sugar is like pouring acid into your veins. It creates oxidative stress that destroys vitamin E and damages the vessel walls. In my clinical experience, the missing piece for many seniors is a lack of high-potency antioxidants and the right kind of fats that actually nourish the vascular system. If we want to keep our pipes clean, we have to stop feeding them the sludge of processed carbohydrates and inflammatory oils.
It's so confusing for people who have been following the same dietary rules for 40 years to hear that they might be doing more harm than good. It feels like the goalposts are always moving. If the toast and cereal aren't the answer, what are the powerhouse foods that actually support these four vitamins, B3, C, E, and K2, that you've been emphasizing? I think we all want a grocery list that feels like a prescription for vitality rather than just a list of things we can't have.
I love that perspective, Jane, eating as a prescription for vitality. Instead of focusing on what to take away, let's focus on what to flood the body with. For vitamin E, which is so crucial for preventing that sticky blood and protecting our nerves, we should be looking at things like sunflower seeds, almonds, and avocados. These aren't just snacks, they are vascular protectors. For vitamin C and the collagen we talked about earlier, it's not just oranges. Think about bell peppers, broccoli, and strawberries, foods that keep the vessel walls strong. For niacin or B3, we want clean proteins like turkey, tuna, or even peanuts, which help with that natural vasodilation. And for vitamin K2, which is perhaps the hardest to get in a standard American diet, we look to fermented foods like certain cheeses or even natto or grass-fed dairy. When you shift your diet toward these whole, nutrient-dense foods, you are essentially performing a daily internal tune-up. I've seen patients whose blood markers improve significantly just by swapping their morning bagel for an avocado and some seeds. It sounds simple, but at the cellular level, it's a revolution. You are giving your blood vessels the raw materials they need to stay flexible and clear.
It really is a revolution in thinking that our breakfast can be a form of vascular medicine. I think it gives people a sense of control that they often feel they've lost. When you see a patient who makes these changes, how quickly do they start to feel it? Is this something that takes years to show results, or does the body respond more quickly than we might expect to this kind of nutritional flooding?
You'd be surprised, Jane. While structural changes like clearing out old plaque do take time, the functional changes, how well your vessels dilate and how thin or smooth your blood flows, can start to improve in as little as a few weeks. When you stop the inflammatory assault from processed foods and start providing the protective power of vitamin E and C, the endothelium starts to produce more nitric oxide almost immediately. Patients often tell me that within a month they feel brighter, not just in their legs, but in their overall energy levels. Their feet don't feel as cold, or they notice that they don't get that late afternoon slump as badly. This is because when you improve circulation in the legs, you're improving it everywhere, including the brain. The body is incredibly resilient. It's always looking for a reason to heal. When we stop giving it the villains and start giving it the heroes, it responds with a gratitude that you can feel in every step you take. It's never too late to change the menu of your life to support the health of your vessels.
Dr. Gupta, as we move toward the practical side of staying healthy, I want to talk about the power of the small. We often think that to make a big difference in our health, we have to make massive sweeping changes, running miles a day or undergoing major procedures. But for someone who is 75 or 80, those things can feel impossible. I'm reminded of a woman you mentioned in our pre-show notes, Margaret Lewis, who managed to turn her health around not with a marathon, but with tiny, consistent shifts. How can these small, almost invisible habits accumulate into a life-saving transformation for our circulation?
Margaret Lewis is the perfect example of the power of the small, Jane. When she first came to me, she could barely walk to her mailbox without her legs feeling like they were made of lead. She didn't start by hiking mountains. She started by doing calf pumps while she sat in her chair watching the news, just simply flexing her feet up and down to help the blood move. She started drinking an extra glass of water to keep her blood volume up, and she committed to a 5-minute walk 3 times a day. Just 5 minutes. It seemed almost silly to her at first, but what she was doing was consistently signaling to her body that it needed to prioritize circulation. Combined with the vitamin C and K2 we discussed, those small movements began to reinforce her vein walls. I told her, Margaret, we aren't looking for a miracle today. We are looking for a 1% improvement every day. And that is exactly what happened. Over a year, those 1% gains added up to a woman who was eventually able to walk 2 miles along the California coast.
A 1% improvement every day. That is such a manageable goal. It takes the mountain of health and turns it into a series of small, achievable steps. I think for many of our listeners, the idea of 5 minutes is something they can actually say yes to. But beyond the physical movement, what about the psychological habit of checking in with ourselves? I think many seniors are taught to not complain or to just get on with it, but that can be a dangerous habit when it comes to vascular health, can it?
You're absolutely right. The habit of stoicism can be a death sentence in geriatric medicine. We have to replace the habit of ignoring with the habit of observing. I taught Margaret to do a vascular check every morning. She would look at the color of her feet, feel the temperature, and check for any new swelling. By becoming an active observer of her own body, she caught small issues before they became big ones. Another small but vital habit is how we sit. Many of us have the habit of crossing our legs or sitting for hours in a deep sofa that cuts off circulation behind the knees. I encouraged Margaret to swap her deep chair for one that allowed her feet to be flat on the floor or slightly elevated. These aren't medical treatments in the traditional sense, but they are the daily environment in which our blood vessels have to function. When you combine better ergonomics, tiny movements, and the right nutrients, you are creating a perfect storm for healing.
It sounds like we're talking about becoming the CEO of our own health, where even the smallest employee, like a 5-minute walk, has a vital role to play. It's about building a culture of care within ourselves. For someone who is currently feeling stuck in that lead-legged state, what is the very first small habit you would recommend they start today, right after they finish listening to this podcast?
The very first thing I would say is hydration and a victory walk. Most seniors are chronically dehydrated, which makes the blood thicker and harder to pump. Drink a full glass of water and then walk for just 3 minutes, even if it's just around your living room. Do it 3 times today. That small act tells your brain and your heart that the legs are still in play. Then look at your plate. Can you add one thing that contains vitamin E or C today? 1 handful of seeds, 1 piece of fruit? These are the building blocks. Margaret Lewis didn't change her life in a day. She changed her habits in a day, and those habits changed her life. We have to move away from the idea that aging is something that happens to us and toward the idea that it is something we can actively participate in. Those tiny, consistent actions are the true fountain of youth for our circulatory system. They keep the rivers flowing, the nerves firing, and the spirit alive.
Dr. Gupta, we have covered so much ground today, from the biology of our arteries to the psychology of aging and the power of nutrition. It's clear that the 4 vitamins, B3, C, E, and K2, are more than just supplements. They are essential tools for maintaining our freedom. But as we look at the statistics, we see that cardiovascular issues and circulation problems remain the leading causes of disability in people over 60. It feels like there is a gap between what we know in the lab and how we live in our homes. If you could distill all your years of experience into a few golden rules for anyone listening who wants to ensure their next 20 or 30 years are spent in motion rather than in a chair, what would they be?
My first golden rule, Jane, is to treat your circulation as your second heart. We all worry about our heart beating, but we rarely think about the thousands of miles of vessels that the heart is pumping into. If those vessels are stiff or clogged, the heart fails. So the rule is keep it flowing. Never allow yourself to be sedentary for more than an hour. My second rule is to nourish the infrastructure. This is where our 4 vitamins come in. You must ensure you have the niacin to dilate, the vitamin C to strengthen, the vitamin E to protect, and the vitamin K2 to direct the calcium away from your pipes and into your bones. This isn't just good advice, it is a clinical necessity for aging vessels. Statistics show that people who maintain even a moderate level of these key nutrients have a significantly lower risk of developing the kind of blood clots or arterial narrowing that leads to strokes or amputations. We have to stop being passive about our nutrition and start being intentional.
Being intentional, that's such a key phrase. It means moving beyond just eating what's there and actually choosing the things that keep us alive and moving. I think many people get overwhelmed by the science, but when you break it down into these four specific pillars, it feels much more manageable. But I also want to ask about the golden rule of listening to the body. You've mentioned that the body whispers before it screams. How do we become better listeners? How do we distinguish between the normal aches of a long life and the whispers of a vascular system in trouble? Mom.
That leads me to my third golden rule. Never ignore a change in sensation. If your feet feel different today than they did a month ago, colder, unrulier, or numb, that is a whisper. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you it's just age. Age is a number. A change in sensation is a signal. A normal ache from a busy day usually goes away with rest. A vascular ache, claudication, often starts with activity and stops when you rest. That is a very specific whisper that says your arteries are struggling. My fourth rule is to advocate for your own pipes. When you go to the doctor, don't just talk about your blood pressure, ask about your peripheral circulation, ask to have the pulses in your feet checked. If we caught these issues at the whisper stage, we could prevent the vast majority of the screams that end up in the emergency room. We have the data. Jane, the American Heart Association, and major international journals have consistently shown that early intervention in vascular health through diet and lifestyle can extend a person's active lifespan by a decade or more.
A decade or more of active life, that is a staggering gift. It's the difference between being at your grandchild's graduation or watching it on a screen from a hospital bed. I think your golden rules provide a beautiful framework for taking back our power. It's about being proactive, being intentional, and being a student of our own bodies. As we look at the big picture, it seems that the secret to healthy kidneys and a healthy body after 60 isn't a secret at all. It's a matter of flow.
It really is that simple and that profound, Jane. Everything in the body, from the kidneys we talk about so often on this show to the brain and the toes, depends on that flow. When we protect the vessels, we protect the life they carry. My final golden rule is hope through action. Don't just hope you'll stay mobile. Take the actions that guarantee it. Every time you choose a handful of nuts over a sugary snack or a 5-minute walk over another hour on the couch, you are voting for your future self. You are deciding that your 80s and 90s will be years of presence, not years of absence. We have the roadmap, we have the vascular vitamins, and most importantly, we have the resilience of the human body. The golden years can truly be golden, but only if we keep the gold, our blood, moving freely through every inch of our being.
Dr. Gupta, as we come to the end of our time today, I find myself reflecting on the word freedom. We've talked about medicine, vitamins, and biology, but at the core of it all, we've been talking about the freedom to live our lives on our own terms, the freedom to walk through a garden, to stand and hug a friend, to live without the constant gnawing fear that our bodies are a ticking time bomb. It's a deeply human thing, isn't it, to want to remain whole as we age. Your stories today, Robert, Linda, George, and Margaret, they aren't just medical cases. They are stories of people fighting to keep their place in the world. What is the one final thought you want to leave with our listeners who might be feeling a bit fragile today to give them the strength to start this journey?
Jane, the message I want everyone to hear is that you are not fading away. Your body is a miraculous living system that is constantly trying to maintain its balance, even at 70, 80, or 90. I have spent my career looking at the most complex parts of human anatomy, and I am still in awe of how much the body can recover if it is simply given the right support. When we talk about these 4 vitamins and these small habits, we aren't just talking about health tips. We are talking about the act of self-love. Taking care of your circulation is a way of honoring the life you've lived and the years you have yet to see. I want you to remember that every step you take, no matter how small or slow, is a victory. Don't let the fear of getting old rob you of the joy of being alive today. You have the tools, you have the knowledge, and most importantly, you have the right to be well. It has been such a privilege to share these stories with you, Jane, and to everyone listening, please don't give up on your body. It hasn't given up on you.
Dr. Gupta, thank you. Your words have been a beacon of clarity and a much-needed source of encouragement. You've reminded us that while we cannot stop the clock, we can certainly choose how we move through time. I am so grateful for your wisdom and for the compassion you bring to your work. It has been a true honor to have you here on Healthy Kidneys After 60.
The honor was mine, Jane. Thank you for creating this space for such vital conversations. To all the listeners out there, remember, your circulation is your lifeline. Keep it strong, keep it clear, and keep moving. I wish you all a journey filled with health, mobility, and many more beautiful miles ahead. Thank you for having me, and stay well. Oh.
And thank you to all of you for joining us today. I hope this conversation has sparked something in you, a new sense of possibility, or perhaps just the motivation to take that first victory walk around your home. Remember, your health is a journey, not a destination, and we are here to walk it with you. If you found today's episode helpful, please subscribe to our channel, Healthy Kidneys After 60, so you don't miss our upcoming episodes, where we will continue to dive deep into the stories and the science that help us thrive in our golden years. Share this with a friend or a loved one who might need to hear that their heavy legs don't have to be their final story. Until next time, I'm Jane Pauley. Take care of yourselves, listen to your body's whispers, and keep that life-giving flow moving. We'll see you in the next podcast.